Cordyceps brain infection, or known as CBI for short, gave way to a scorched civilization within the Last of Us lore. Panic rose when high-volume patients complained about feverish symptoms after a well-cooked dinner. It's no surprise that the virus was cross-contaminated from South American crops that harbored the deadly strain. Medical patients began fighting against doctors as numbers spiked through the daily admittance rate. These numbers were astronomical, spiking upwards to about 300%. The Food and Drug Administration attempted one last-ditch effort for service recall. They desperately tried to rip fungal produce from the store shelves all across the continent. A perfect storm swept across the entire United States as residents fell victim to the CBI. Our information will explain the first stage for the infected, who are known as runners. The CBI grips around the brain via molded crops, bites, or spores within the environment. Spores will only produce if the infected entities are killed, and it doesn't matter what stage they are. An organism can still die and leave spore density within the environment. Life finds a way by devastated nature. A normal person who is subjected to spores will witness elevated aggression, higher blood pressure, and a decrease of motor skills. Any call for humankind would be lost at that particular moment. What makes runners stand out is their reddish skin due to the blood pressure being way out of control. They may look like ordinary people, but any semblance for humanity is now gone. Fungal growth causes a slight ruination for the body with this stage. Faces will crack open with small mushroom polyps developing on the skin. This readily signifies the next dreaded stage for runners after a long duration. Infected beings are more animalistic and rely on instinct more than anything else. Usually they will gash, grab, and try to bite on a survivor for the next source of dinner if they happen to spot the player in close vicinity. When runners are idle, you could argue that they are the most humane in between infected stages. They will moan, cry, twitch, and ache as the virus cycles through their bloodstream. Since the higher brain function is cut in half, this renders their ability for English language invalid. The early trouble with memory loss and the sporadic nature involving the limbic regions is the first symptom for freshly infected. Stage 2 is known as the stalker. Remember what I said earlier about runners being freshly infected individuals? Well, stalkers occur if the victim has been infected for a longer period of time, averaging from 2 weeks to onward from that time. Stalkers are seen as the next progression, with abnormal stalks bursting out of their foreheads. Fungal growth impedes through the skull as vision starts to become blurred. It starts to become an afterthought during this process. The infamous echolocation begins forming at this rate. We will revisit that notion later, but I like to keep it a little simple here. You know how bats use sound in caves in order to get around and navigate through the environment. Well, it's really no different here. Stalkers really like waiting in the shadows and retreating so they can finish prey off. Then they attack them from behind when the survivor isn't paying that much attention. Their clothes become heavily tattered, possibly because human emissions start to get all over it, and therefore it starts to break down the natural fiber. That goes double when you see the devastating decay that formulates with the skin and marrow. Some stalkers even have a skeletal looking appearance when the nose is no longer relevant on the person. I'll leave that up to you to interpret that analysis. Coming up at infamous stage number 3 is the stage known as the clicker. Mushroom fungal growth has now devastated the head once a person has been infected for 12 months. Total blindness occurs at this stage where the eyeballs cease functionality and it looks like they are destroyed entirely. Hardened plates form over the head, which almost serves as a protection against a direct headshot. They say that punching a clicker is a little bit ineffective due to the natural strength enhancement. I would agree, yes, the fungus does give benefits as the blind sprawls across this lawless land. Echolocation is now in full utilization if a clicker hears noise. Once heard, it will barrel towards someone until they are effectively killed. They have a more powerful mandible that clamps down on the arteries within the neck, which probably explains why the person dies so suddenly after a clicker bite. Of course, with every natural strength enhancement comes a weakness. We see that the Cordyceps cannot handle fire. We also see that they can be duped if they are fully blind. Survivalists have learned to steer clear and not make a peep if a clicker is in the vicinity. A distinct clicking noise could spell the end of a lowly traveler. A bloater is the fourth stage of infection from the CBI. Its full body is now covered in deep fungal plating that can be broken off for harmful mycotoxin to be thrown offensively. A bloater takes a 15-year developmental process in order for this stage to happen. Once reached, it is nigh impervious when gunfire hits a bloater's skin. Welts, stagger structure, and scleroderma formulates all over the body. The head resembles a clicker more or less, just a bit bigger in size. It's easy in assuming that bloaters can use their own form of echolocation when tracking down some prey. The mycotoxin and pus on the body can also be destroyed in heavy gunfire, meaning that ranged methods for the bloaters could be deemed ineffective with enough luck. If a bloater grabs someone, then their strength is essentially tenfold this time around due to the increased muscle mass. It will plunge its fingers down into the depths of the jawline for a survivor, ripping, tearing, and also stretching the nasal area until the face explodes, leaving a wet red orifice behind. It's like a crater imploding when we see it. It's not a pretty sight when you really think about it. The mycotoxin is very important for bloater combat because if a human stays in it for far too long, then the respiratory system could become poisoned. Cancers and CBI infection can fill through the lungs, blood, and heart. Therefore, standing in one place against a bloater is just a surefire way for mycotoxin to take hold, and eventually you will succumb. Shamblers seem relevant for alternative infection. They are stage 4 entities that don't necessarily morph all the way into bloaters. You can tell they are unique within the Seattle, Washington area. Ellie, Ordina, Jackson outsiders have never seen one before up until this point. It is cited that a change in temperature causes a divergence point for infection. For example, bloaters were stuck in dry, cooler environments. Shamblers have more exposure to wet temperatures and humidity as a result. Neil Druckmann stated that the environment also plays key to obvious infection. Shamblers were in mid-bloater form before the rain finally changed them. Therefore, they still possess crippling strength whenever they grab someone in close quarter combat. Their heads are embiggened because of the entire pustule aftermath that seems to be taking place. This pus can emit some gas-like venom that sears into the skin of a victim, causing third-degree burns if it connects. Shamblers will also explode this venomous gas upon death, almost like a last-ditch effort for revenge. The body is giant, lanky, and downright horrific with these pustules, almost like living mouths on each particular part of the shoulders. It is likely that Shamblers still take 15 years regarding mutation. The unofficial stage 5 is known as the Rat King. The Rat King is the most dangerous infected that has ever stepped foot in the universe of The Last of Us. Seattle's main hospital was labeled as Ground Zero. Ground Zero was a hospital where the first infected came into fruition. Federal officials tried their best in fighting patients on ground level. This proved fruitless as many died within Ground Zero halls. Cries of pain emptied into the bleak atmosphere. A federal officer pleaded with known survivors in a note. He illustrated that the hospital should be eradicated with an immense explosion, and that the only way to take these fuckers out was to light up a little party. Whatever happened from here fell to the wayside and on deaf ears. The outbreak was contained within as doors were locked in horrific fashion. 25 years later, a special mutation occurred for this infected breed. Multiple people were conjoined in a tight space so the Rat King could be born. The body is like a big bluish abomination all molded into one. It's like putting together a bloater, a shambler, a stalker, and clickers, putting them into one giant blender and letting the chaos spread. Ligaments jut from the back, the side, and the bottom. These multiple functions keep the Rat King upwards. The name Rat King is taken from the real mythos, with multiple rats being bound together by their tails. Rat King could also have a stalker variant detached from the Rat King itself after suffering extreme damage. This is the first time ever that stalkers can throw mycotoxin, meaning the ability to adapt is quite astonishing with the bloater counterpart in sync. Rat Kings can smash down entire metal structures, meaning that this distinctive variant is the strongest form of infected. I would consider that the conjoined heads also act as a way for the Rat King to consume, since the multiple heads will gnaw on Abby in the death animations. In conclusion, there's various layers that remains untapped from the CBI. It can infect monkeys, but what about other wild animals like deers or dogs? It's an ever-present, ever-changing, and ever-growing threat to the world of The Last of Us, although there is one last hope in the world within one woman, a woman who has learned redemption through the strongest wills that life has to offer. Let's just hope that someday, in this universe, she saves the people on her own terms. After that, the last of mankind could be normal yet again. We will endure and we will survive beyond humanity, beyond desolation.